Yo, what is up, guys, and welcome back to the channel. It's your boy, the baddest baba that ever baba'd, and we have our first balance patch for the Divine Order set. Now, some of you guys may have caught my video the other week with Clutch. We went over the war cards. Well, a lot of them have been changed, so I'm putting this video out there just to do an update, go over the cards, the changes, what's going to be in the meta, what's not. So let's take a look. So the first card I think we need to look at is Thundercaller, and they've changed it from at the end of your turn, if you are frenzied, give +1/+1 to each of your Vikings, to at the end of your turn, if you're frenzied, give +1/+1 to your strongest Viking. So what that means, this is going to affect Rolling Thunder as well, because Rolling Thunder summons the Thundercallers, and you're no longer giving +1/+1 to all of your Vikings, which typically with the war decks that were being ran, that was pretty much their entire board, so it's a lot less oppressive. Now, with that being said, this card still seems good to me, and I know the top decks this weekend, a lot of them are running this thing. It's not terribly difficult to get frenzied, and each time you do it, you're just going to be buffing your strongest Viking up, which a lot of the times is the Thundercaller. So this is a snowball card, but give it a couple turns, you could be at a 5/5 or a 6/6, and to have that by 5 or 6 mana is pretty decent, and I think this card is still gonna be good. Now let's look at Rolling Thunder, and part of the reason why this card was so insane was because of the text on Thundercaller, but they went ahead and changed Rolling Thunder as well this balance patch. So it went from a 6 mana card to a 7 mana card, and it now summons 3 Thundercallers if frenzied instead of 4. So this card being a 7 mana card now, I want to go back to what I usually say. At 7 mana, you've got some good options. I mean, you got Demogorgons. If you're running a tempo deck, you've got things like Ashen Drake. So the card has to be really good for me to want to run it at 7 mana. And with Rolling Thunder, you're kind of just building a board, and I think Rolling Thunder is still pretty decent because you do get 24 stats for 7 mana, which isn't bad. But you've got cards from the core set like the Bull that's at 10/10. So this is better than that, and it's going to keep buffing, but it might not be that great because you probably want to run this in an aggro deck, and I think at 7 mana you're looking more at like a mid-range tempo deck or control. And I know a lot of people cut this from their decks this weekend, so it's not as good. I don't think it's gonna be ran. I mean, it's not terrible. Maybe if you did do some sort of mid-range Viking, you try to end the game out at 7 mana, 8 mana, it could be good, but yeah, I think this is going to be a pass now for most people. Next, we're going to take a look at some of the God Power changes for War. So Onslaught, completely removed, and personally, I don't like this. I mean, I've never been a huge fan of Onslaught, especially when it was just rampant in the meta and like dominating everything. People argue that Onslaught is boring, it doesn't take skill, but this isn't true, especially when War wasn't as strong before the Enduring Shield changes. Onslaught was a true test of managing your resources. You're using your Twin Strike creatures to try to get as much value as possible. You're saving certain cards like Carnage Sweep or Demogorgon for certain situations, saving your poison minions for your opponent's big creatures. So I thought Onslaught was a cool archetype, and now that they removed it, I'm not really sure if War has a good God Power for a control deck. I mean, what are you gonna use? A Slayer God Power? Like, it just doesn't seem good. But this is what the community wanted, so they took it out, and they replaced Onslaught with Enrage, a new form of Enrage, which I don't think anyone thinks this God Power is good. It gives 1 strength to one of your creatures, and it also deals 1 damage. With the old Enrage deck that people used to run, they ran a lot of 1 health creatures, and it was a low curve deck, and I just don't see this being good. Maybe if you could use this on one of your opponent's creatures, you got a little ping damage, you could pop a ward with it, but this, I don't see how this could be played, especially when you have God Powers like the Slayer God Power. They just seem much better. Okay, and we've all been waiting for this one, the Enduring Shield change. Now, this has been a long time coming. They finally changed it, and they reduced the strength from 2 to 1. They took Blitz off it, and to balance it out a little bit, it now gives Protect to your strongest creature without Protected. So, I mean, now that there's not Blitz on this, it's easy to remove it. I like this change a lot because it gives people a chance for counterplay, which I think is always good. And it may not be bad because you still could potentially give Protected twice. You know, with the strength being changed to 1 attack, you get a lot less value out of it, because a lot of the times how this was used, you would play it, you would kill a creature, you'd get Protect to one of your creatures, and then that creature would kill off another creature, or even 2 if it had Twin Strike. So with the attack being lowered to 1, I think it took a lot of value out of this card. I know a lot of the decks actually remove this from the list. It could be a little slow, and yeah, I mean, if you play this and it just gets removed right away, it's just not good. So I think this is a good change. Greeter list may run it, and you still get the value of Protect, which is super valuable. Don't get me wrong, but it's definitely not as good, and I don't know if I'd be playing this card, at least at the mythic level. Okay, and the next card we're looking at is the Revered Seer. So they reduced the stats from a 3/3 to a 2/2 and changed the text from, at the end of your turn, give +1/+1 to a random creature in your hand, and if you are frenzied, also give +1/+1 to each of your creatures on the board, which is kind of insane. I thought this card was crazy, and they did change the text to, if you are frenzied, at the end of your turn, give +1/+1 to each of your other creatures, and that means creatures on the board. So with that change, a lot of people took this out of their deck. I mean, it is 4 mana, so in an aggro deck, this is much slower. I mean, the stats got lowered, the buff got lowered. It's not as good, obviously, but I like to compare this card to the Sing Song Satyr. Now, this is another 4 mana card with a roar effect of give each other friendly creature +1 strength. So I guess you could argue with the Seer, you're not only getting the 1 strength, but you're getting the 1 health as well. And then each turn you're frenzied, you're buffing again and again and again. So your board just gets bigger and bigger. I could see this being played in a greedier list, maybe a more mid-range list, but it definitely doesn't seem as good in the quick, fast Slayer decks we're being seen played. Now we're going to be looking at the Inspiring Scald, which wasn't too crazy. I mean, it was definitely really good. So the old text used to read, give +1/+1 to a random creature in your hand. If you're frenzied, also give it Twin Strike. And now, if you're frenzied, you give Twin Strike to the weakest creature in your hand. So a lot of nerfs there. And also, I think this card, I mean, it was played in the Slayer list, the aggro Slayer list, but I thought this card also had a ton of potential for an Onslaught deck, just to be able to give Twin Strike to another creature and give it that buff. Now it's just got the Twin Strike, and Onslaught is removed, so this card just doesn't seem as good. It It's slow. If you're playing this in an aggro deck, like it's going to the weakest creature. So, I mean, if you give Twin Strike to like a 1/1 or a 2/2, like, what are you going to be Twin Striking, right? So, I don't think this card is good anymore. So, another quick change to Caged Berserker. They reduced the stats from a 2/2 to a 1/1, and they removed Blitz from the card. So this was a card that each time you were frenzied, it buffed up in your hand. The change from a 2/2 to a 1/1 doesn't seem to be that big of a deal because it's still getting the 2/2 buff every time you're frenzied. However, the removing Blitz from the card, I think, cripples it a lot. This, obviously played in aggro decks, so to play this at 5 mana or 4 mana in a pip and have Blitz, what would it be, like a 10/10, something around there? The card was good, and now you're just getting a statted creature for the 5 mana, which isn't terrible, but again, like without the Blitz, it makes it much slower, and I think there are just better cards to run. I think you could probably argue running Red Fume Serum over this card, and throw that onto a creature that's already on the board, so when you give the buff, you can attack with it right away. So this card, I don't think we're going to see it played in aggro decks. Again, like, mid-range decks could be good, could be decent. I know War's got a couple cards now that are just giving them, like, statted creatures or snowball creatures that come out, like, in the mid portion of the game. So maybe we'll see some archetypes like that. I know a lot of people have been experimenting, but in the current fast archetype, I think this card is going to be a pass. Now, with the obscene amount of War played last weekend, a lot of the other domains got overlooked. I know Deception had some real oppressive cards, so we're going to look at the changes for the Deception cards now. The first one was Shadow Matriarch. So they reduced the health from 2 to 1, and they also removed Backline. And this is a card that, so it's hidden for 1 turn, and at the start of your turn, summon a Shadow of Lethenon. So now when you play this, it's still got the hidden, so you're likely gonna get a Shadow of Lethenon, but it's much easier to remove now. Even with hidden, it can be taken out like with spells like Auric Rush, Tracking Bolt. So more counterplay available. I think that the 1 health nerf is a big deal for this card because it can be taken out easier, and now you can't cheat it or use, I guess it's Orpheus Distraction now. Now you can't hide it again and get an extra Shadow of Lethenon. And with the removed backline, like anything can attack this once the hidden is up. So this card, I mean, it's still good because like getting the Shadow Lethenon is, I mean, that's a valuable card in my opinion. But you got to be more careful now just because of how easily this can be removed. So I think people are still going to be playing this. Obviously not as good, but if you're getting free cats, even 1 extra cat can make a difference. So I think this card is still pretty decent. Next, we're taking a look at the Cobra Scepter. This was a relic that every time your opponent drew a card, they took 2 damage, so now it does 1 damage, and it's probably a good change. I mean, this was easy to play around. You just run relic removal, and I feel like this card being a card almost forced you to run relic removal, because if you didn't, you just die, right? And some of the games felt really bad too, and it's like, you have the relic removal, but you're just not drawing it, and you're losing to a 2-mana relic like this. I think it's a good change if you compare it to cards like the Skull Scepter, which is a death card that does 1 damage every time one of your creatures dies. I mean, it makes more sense. I don't think the card's bad, like to do 1 damage. You're still punishing your opponent for not running a relic removal, and the 1 damage is going to add up because you're doing 1 damage each turn they draw. Of course, Deception has cards that's going to make your opponent draw more. So I mean, you could still easily do like 5-10 damage, even more, having this out. So I mean, I think it's still good. I think this is an appropriate change. Moving on to Magic, and I think Magic was under the microscope just because the #1 deck the other weekend was a Magic deck, and it was a damn good one too. So they changed Dimitrios Playwright, which was a Magic legendary, one of the Magic legendaries. So Dimitrios no longer upgrades every draft in your hand, only one. The extra writing was bad for his wrist, haha. Each time you upgrade your draft, it also increases in mana cost. So I think what people were doing, they were cloning this card or like portal wrangling it. I'm not really sure. I'm not a huge Magic player. So this change, it seems like very specific. I think it's fair because you still get the final draft. You still get to play the card as it was intended to be played. It's just less exploitable now, and I don't really see this card going anywhere. I think it's still good. You still get the final draft. Your one final draft is still going to upgrade to do, I believe it's a 5 damage and draw 5 cards. So I mean, this card seems fine. It seems like it's in a fine spot. And we've got some God Power changes here. Palace Genius. This one was a Magic one. It went from 2 mana to 3 mana, and this just gave you a 1 mana Magic spell. And this was it seemed to be the most popular God Power that was being ran. So I don't know. I think so. You get a 1 mana spell for 2 mana, and then you'd play it. So you're pretty much getting a 1 mana spell for 3 mana, which doesn't seem too bad on paper. But when you saw this God Power in action, it seemed really oppressive, especially towards aggro decks, because they just pretty much had unlimited removal. A lot of those 1 mana Magic spells just did 2 damage, and you can easily remove creatures with those. So I think this change was probably good, but at the same time, now that's 3 mana, I don't know if this is going to be ran anymore. It seems like the Magic would just use the God Power, the Mage Bolt one or whatever that does 1 damage. And so, I mean, it's probably good just so that Magic doesn't become the one that's out of control, at least the aggro Magic deck. And we also had a change to Nephru's Sacrifice, which was a death God Power that lets you draw 1 card. It did 2 damage to your god, and you drew 1 card. So this one also got changed from 2 mana to 3 mana. Now, I mean, I had used this God Power. I knew it was really good with the Rock Drake and Death deck, but I tried this one, and then with the control types of decks that I like to play, I felt Blood Ritual was better. And so I mean, I wasn't really like a huge fan of this God Power. I mean, it makes sense for like an aggro. I guess it's okay. I mean, I didn't really use it. I think this makes it so the other God Powers look more appealing, and it probably was a little overwhelming, like at least when played with that Rock Drake deck, because I know that deck was just hard countered a lot of other decks. So it seems like an appropriate change, but same thing with the Magic. With this GP now being 3 mana, is anyone gonna really run it? To draw 1 card for 3 mana and then to take 2 damage on top of it, it doesn't seem all that great. So this next change kind of caught me off guard. It's to a death card, which was the Cursed Obelisk. So they changed the text from backline, roar, summon a 1/1 zombie. At the end of your turn, if you are frenzied, summon a 1/1 zombie, otherwise deal 1 damage to this creature, to now backline, can attack. At the end of your turn, if you are frenzied, summon a 1/1 zombie. So the roar effect is gone. This can attack, but it doesn't take 1 damage if you don't have the frenzied. So I think they did this so it stay on the board a little bit easier, but we didn't really see this card ran too much. I mean, it's just a zombie getter. You don't have the roar effect anymore, which is kind of meh. I don't know if this was actually a buff. It seemed more like a balance, but I don't know why they did that, because this card wasn't really ran. I mean, it's 5 mana. It's a 1/4 structure. I mean, I guess it's got the backline, but these zombies are just so easy to remove. I mean, there's a ton of GPs in the game that just do 1 damage. We talked about it earlier. Spells like Auric Rush or Tracking Bolt exist. So I don't know if they're trying to make this card look more appealing. They probably could do something to make a lot of the new death cards appealing, because I mean, right now we're looking at, this was a Rock Drake, but I had this pulled up earlier. So for the last three days, we got board wipe death. Last 7 days, all board wipe death, and then that sacrifice death deck, which is just the Rock Drakes, Possessed Acolyte, and there's not a whole lot of Divine Order cards. I mean, I'm not seeing any in that, and with the board wipe death decks, so there's just not an appeal to run these new death cards, at least yet. I mean, it's still as early. We're still figuring out the meta. Now that war isn't crazy dominant, I think there's going to be a lot of more experimentation. So this might have been an attempt to make this card more appealing. I don't know, but it doesn't seem all that great to me personally. Okay, and the last card change we're looking at is a nature card, the Finnian Fruit Bear, which was probably one of the crazier cards from the Divine Order set, honestly, in my opinion. So they changed the text from, after this creature attacks, deal 1 damage to the enemy god. At the end of your turn, if you are frenzied, summon a 1/1 Vibrant Fruit. And they just took out the first part of this, which was, after this creature attacks, deal 1 damage to the enemy god. And so this just takes away the auto frenzy. I know if you got this card out early and made trade with it, you would just get frenzy each turn, and it would just snowball, and like, I feel like you pretty much won the game at that point, unless they had a way to remove it real quick. So I think this change is probably balanced. I mean, it's still a 2/3 for 2 mana, which is decent stats, and of course the Vibrant Fruits, they give your strongest creature +1/+1, so it still has that snowball effect. I still think it's really good. It's just not too oppressive. Like I was saying, I mean, if they got this out early enough, or if you got it out early enough and your opponent wasn't able to remove it, like, it's just pretty much GG with how snowbally this card is. So I think it's an appropriate change. I think this card is still good. It's a great card. And the last change we're talking about, another God Power change, the Flourish God Power from the Nature God. So they changed the text from give +1 strength and regen to one of your creatures until next turn, to give +1 strength and regen to one of your creatures until your opponent's turn, which I'm not really sure what they were doing here, because maybe they're afraid this would be too strong now that a lot of the war cards got nerfed. I mean, you didn't really see, you saw this God Power a little bit, but usually nature would take Animal Bond. But it's not, it doesn't seem like that big of a change. I guess like the one strength and regen doesn't stay on your creature, so your opponent's turn, you lose a little bit of value there. I mean, there's definitely situations where that comes in handy. Maybe it was just enough strength to prevent a value trade by your opponent. So I mean, it's a nerf, but I don't know if this God Power saw enough play to where this is like game breaking or anything. I think Animal Bond will still the most God Power, and will like continue to be. So I'm not really sure why they changed this one. Like, I think they probably could have left this. It's just seeing how the meta played out, and honestly, a lot of these changes, they went harder than I expected. I mean, especially with the war cards, I thought they would start with some light changes, you know, to Rolling Thunder, Thundercaller, and like completely removing Onslaught. That surprised me. I'm kind of surprised they changed Enduring Shield, because I was under the impression that they're trying to keep that, even though the community was really fighting for a change. And so I don't know if I'd go as far to call these changes extreme, but definitely surprised me. And overall, I think this is good. I mean, we're able to experiment a lot more. I know people are worried about board wipe death, but the thing with board wipe death is people are not teching for it properly. They're not building their list to deal with a deck like that. I mean, you really just need some sleep tech, and ward can be helpful as well. And so I'm excited to see where this meta goes. Like, it's a perfect time for experimenting, and I think that all the gods have a fair shot at, you know, at least like doing really well on the weekend. It seems like it's in a good place, and I'm pretty happy about it. Alright guys, and that does it for this video. Thanks again for tuning in. If you like the video, you know, leave a comment, like, subscribe, whatever you want to do. If there's any specific content you'd like to see from me in the future, let me know. And until next time, peace.